Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep today into a complex but really important bit of the UK's tax world.
Uh-huh.
How HMRC supports and tackles the tax affairs of wealthy individuals.
It's definitely a crucial focus area. I mean, when you think about just the sheer amount of tax revenue involved
Right. Yeah.
and, the complexity of the financial setups in this group,
Yeah.
getting compliance right here is pretty fundamental for the system's effectiveness and, frankly, public trust.
Absolutely. And our guide for this deep dive is a recent report from the National Audit Office, the NAO.
Mm-hmm.
They've taken a really close look at how well-equipped HMRC actually is to manage the unique challenges this group presents.
The NAO offers a really valuable view, doesn't it? Independent assessment. They look at the scale of the contribution, how HMRC spots and handles the risks.
Things like avoidance, evasion.
Exactly, or even just honest mistakes, which can happen with complexity. And they look at what's working, what the successes are, and what the ongoing challenges are, too.
Okay, so let's define our terms. Who exactly are we talking about when we say wealthy here? The report uses HMRC's definition.
Yeah, it's quite specific. It's individuals earning over £200,000 a year,
Okay.
or those who've had assets over £2 million, at some point in the last 3 years.
Got it. So income or assets.
Right. And that definition, it captures about 850,000 people in the 2023-24 tax year.
850,000,
think
which
that's
is
right.
what, about 2% of all UK taxpayers?
That's right, roughly 2%.
Okay. So a pretty small percentage of the population overall, but like you said, hugely significant for tax revenue, as we'll see.
Definitely.
So our mission today is basically to pull out the key bits from this NAO report, understand the scale of their tax contribution, how HMRC approaches the specific risks here,
Mm-hmm.
and what the NAO found, what's working well, where the maybe question marks or challenges lie. It's tricky, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially, the report notes nearly three-quarters, 73% use tax agents.
Yeah.
Which means HMRC often doesn't have much direct contact with the actual taxpayer.
That use of agents is a really key factor the NAO flags. It adds another layer to how HMRC needs to engage.
Okay, let's jump straight into the scale of things then.
Yeah.
Because this is where it gets, really interesting.
Uh-huh.
This population of wealthy individuals, it's actually grown quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
The report says they went up from 700,000 back in 2019-20
Right.
to that 850,000 figure now in 2023-24.
And their contribution to the national finances is just massive, absolutely massive. In 2023-24, this group paid $119 billion in personal taxes.
$119 billion. That's immense. Just to put that in context for you listening, that single figure makes up a staggering 25%
A quarter.
of the UK's total personal tax receipts for the year.
Right. A quarter of all personal tax revenue from just 2% of taxpayers. If you average it out, it's about £140,000 paid per wealthy individual.
Wow. £140 average. That really hammers home how important this work is to the Treasury.
Mm-hmm.
And the report digs down even further within that 850,000, doesn't it? It mentions smaller groups.
It does, yeah. It talks about roughly 29,000 individuals with incomes over £1 million in 2324. They alone were liable for about $34 billion of income tax.
Okay.
And yeah, even smaller subsets, about 10,000 people with incomes over £2 million and around 5,000 with assets over $50 million. So the wealth is really concentrated, even within this wealthy category.
So given that scale and the complexity you mentioned earlier, that's why HMRC gives them this special focus.
Exactly. HMRC's thinking, which the NAO looks into, is basically that the sheer complexity of their finances, investments, maybe international assets, multiple income streams, it significantly increases the potential for, non-compliance.
Right.
And that's not always deliberate tax dodging either. Complex stuff just creates more chances for genuine mistakes, alongside, yes, the potential for avoidance or evasion.
And like we said, that high use of tax agents, 73%, means HMRC is often dealing with an intermediary, not the person directly.
Precisely. Which adds another challenge in getting the full picture. That dynamic comes up again and again.
Now, the NAO report does give HMRC credit where it's due. It highlights some significant successes in tackling non-compliance in this area. It's not all just challenges.
No, that's important. The NAO acknowledges that HMRC has substantially increased its compliance yield from wealthy taxpayers.
And compliance yield is.
That's the extra tax collected specifically because of HMRC's compliance work, investigations, checks, nudges, that sort of thing.
Gotcha. And those numbers, they look pretty good from HMRC's point of view.
They've jumped significantly, yeah. The compliance yield went from £2.2 billion back in 2019-20
Okay.
up to $5.2 billion in 2023-24.
Wow, 5.2 billion. That's an extra 3 billion recovered every year now through their work.
It's a big leap, definitely.
The report also mentions a shift in approach, doesn't it? Something about upstream casework.
Yes, the NAO calls that an important innovation. HMRC is trying to move towards more upstream work, basically trying to address potential non-compliance earlier on.
So preventing it before it happens?
Ideally, yeah, rather than just chasing the tax after the fact. It's about getting things right from the start where possible.
And they also try to estimate the overall tax gap for this group.
Yes, HMRC publishes annual estimates. They reckon the tax gap for the wealthy group has been stable and relatively low, about $1.9 billion in 2020-23. The NAO notes that they do produce this estimate.
Okay. And they have dedicated staff for this.
Yeah.
About 900 people.
We're around 910 full-time equivalent staff, yeah. And for about 15,000 taxpayers who are seen as having the highest complexity or maybe the biggest opportunity for non-compliance.
Highest risk.
Kind of, yeah. They assign a specific customer compliance manager, a CCM, aiming for that closer relationship and oversight.
Okay. So on one side, you've got this really big increase in recovered tax, 5.2 billion collected in 23-24. That's, what, 3 billion more than just a few years ago?
Right.
And that 5.2 billion pre-in figure is way higher than their own estimate of the annual tax gap for this group, which was 1.9 billion.
Exactly. And that is the point in the report that really makes you pause.
Why is that? What's the implication?
Well, the big increase in yield is good news for the Treasury, obviously. But, as the NAO points out, the very fact they're finding and collecting so much more tax,
5.2 billion recovered,
compared to an estimated gap of only 1.9 billion, well, it raises a pretty significant question.
which is
Could the actual underlying level of non-compliance among the wealthy be, well, greater than HMRC's estimate suggests? If you're recovering over $5 billion through checks, does it make sense that the total amount going unpaid is only $1.9 billion?
I see. The numbers seem a bit conflicting.
They prompt the NAO to ask, is the tax gap estimate really capturing the full picture here, or is more tax potentially going astray than they think?
That discrepancy is really striking, and the report specifically mentions uncertainty around measuring this gap, especially when it comes to offshore wealth.
Yeah, this is notoriously hard to measure accurately, and the NAO is quite direct about it. HMRC did recently publish its first ever estimate for undeclared income in offshore accounts. $300 million in lost revenue back in 2018-19. But, and this is a big but flagged by the NAO, that estimate only covers income from offshore savings.
Just savings, not other things.
Right. It doesn't include other potentially significant offshore income sources, like, say, trading profits or dividends held offshore.
Which means the true level of tax lost offshore could be, well, potentially much higher than that 300 million figure.
Precisely. The NAO basically says there's just too much uncertainty in how this is measured right now, especially offshore, to be really confident that the true level of non-compliance isn't considerably higher than what's currently detected or estimated.
Okay, another finding the report flags up. HMRC apparently hasn't assessed the risk or the impact of its work, specifically across the different levels of wealth within that big 800 to 50,000 bus group.
That's right.
It notes a kind of lack of specific focus on the very wealthiest individuals.
Yes, that's a key point from the NAO. They actually mentioned that there used to be a dedicated unit years ago, specifically for taxpayers with assets over £10 million.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but it was removed back in 2017. Now, essentially, anyone meeting that £200K income or £200 asset threshold is managed within the same broad team structure.
I see.
So the NAO suggests HMRC should probably look again at whether they need to assess and manage the risks posed by the super wealthy, perhaps more distinctly.
And here's another trend from the report that jumped out at me. Penalties. The number of penalties HMRC issued to wealthy individuals seems to have fallen off a cliff.
It's a really significant drop. In 2023-24, HMRC issued only 456 penalties.
456, okay.
Totaling £5.8 million, and that was in just 5% of the cases they closed that year involving wealthy taxpayers. Now, compare that to 2018-19.
Right.
They issued over 2,000 penalties, 2,153 totaling $16.2 million, and that was in 14% of closed cases.
Wow, that's a huge difference from 14% of cases down to 5%. Any idea why, does the report say?
It doesn't give a definitive reason, no. But it's a trend the NAO observed and, flagged as something worth considering. Could be changes in HMRC's focus, maybe the type of non-compliance they're tackling, perhaps how cases are being settled. It's not clear from the report itself.
Interesting. Okay, moving on to how HMRC organizes all this work. The report suggests that the effort to tackle wealthy noncompliance is a bit spread out across different parts of HMRC.
It does suggest that, yes, the NAO feels this kind of dispersal means HMRC might need a more comprehensive and ambitious strategy focused specifically on the wealthiest, perhaps bringing different strands of work together more cohesively.
Okay. And related to actually handling these cases, especially the big complex ones, I saw the report noted they're taking longer now. Higher value cases are taking more time than they used to.
That's another point raised, yeah. Highlighting potential areas where maybe efficiency could be improved, particularly when you're dealing with really complicated tax affairs that can drag on.
And finally, the NAO also suggests HMRC should think more about the role tax advisors play in all this.
Yes, they point out that advisors can influence compliance both ways positively, by helping people get it right, but potentially negatively too. And understanding that dynamic better is important for HMRC's overall strategy.
Right. So let's try and bring this all together. We've gone through quite a bit from the NAO report. What does this deep dive mean for you listening? Why is this important beyond just, nerding out on a government audit?
Well, I think it really speaks to the overall health and maybe the perceived fairness of the whole tax system. When such a small group contributes such a massive slice of the pie, that quarter of all personal tax revenue, understanding the challenges and making sure that compliance works properly here is, well, it's vital. It really highlights that even for a sophisticated tax authority like HMRC, dealing with huge wealth, complex international structures, skilled advisors, is incredibly challenging. It's not always straightforward.
Not black and white at all. And the report does note HMRC is aware of some of these issues. They're apparently working on improving efficiency, effectiveness, and aiming for more prosecutions for evasion.
Including among the wealthy, yeah.
So it suggests they're trying to address some of these points.
It definitely indicates this isn't a static picture. It's an ongoing effort in a constantly shifting, complex environment.
Okay, so to wrap up this deep dive then, the NAO report confirms, yes, wealthy individuals are absolutely crucial to the UK tax base. They contribute a huge amount. And HMRC has had real success in boosting the extra tax collected from this group through its compliance work that jumped to £5.2 billion is significant.
Definitely. However, the report also lays bare some pretty big questions, doesn't it? Whether that large increase in yield actually hints that the real level of non-compliance might be higher than the official estimate.
Right, the £5 2BN versus £1 9BN issue.
Exactly. Then there's the acknowledged major uncertainty around measuring offshore non-compliance properly, the potential lack of specific focus on the very wealthiest within the group, and that noticeable decline in penalties being issued.
So it's a picture of kind of success mixed with some real challenges and maybe some blind spots. Questions about whether the full scale of the issue, especially in those really complex offshore areas, is truly understood or being tackled effectively yet.
That sums it up pretty well, I think. A mixture of progress and persistent, difficult questions.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to mull over. Given everything we've discussed, the huge tax contribution from this group, the fact the group is growing, and the acknowledged difficulty in measuring complex areas like offshore wealth, how can tax authorities, like HMRC, best strike that balance? The balance between supporting compliance for those trying to get it right, while also effectively challenging potential non-compliance, especially at the top end, to maintain public confidence that everyone is contributing appropriately.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or maybe the multi-billion-pound question here. It's a balance that likely needs constant reassessment as the financial world keeps getting more complex.